it was a chair in another department in Dalton State years ago that gave me it's not a bucket, but relatively sort of about like that size and relatively wide kind of bucket that he filled with candy our first day of the fall semester years ago. That was a nice gesture, and I kept it sort of a bit in his honor. But I filled the damn thing with a bunch of candy, and it's almost like it people just sort of that invites people to start. They see that thing, and it's always filled. So it always kind of is inviting people, like even students, even if I'm in my office and students are walking by, like, can I get a piece of candy? Sure. And sometimes it invites
Oh,
them to sit down, and then so.
well, then I'm not surprised that you were attracted to a book like this. So I'm going to start with the first question, which was,
Hmm.
what is your background and interest in looking at the emotional aspects of learning?
Well, it was kind of interesting because being at Dalton State, so principally I work with elementary education teacher candidates, so students that want to be future teachers at the elementary level, but we I prepare them to work effectively with English language learners. Of course, that term is now sort of switching to multilingual learners of English, which I think is better and more appropriate and all of that. But um, and so I sort of came in this sort of a bit sort of indirectly through a couple of ways, I think. So one is as my background is in SLA, second language acquisition, but it's actually kind of more on the foreign language side of things. So for a long time, I saw myself as more or less kind of this type of position I'm doing now, but really focused more on being so like in a language department where I'm teaching undergrad and graduate levels in like advanced French or advanced Spanish in the language, but also working with teacher candidates of foreign language teacher candidates at the secondary level. So, but as I've gone through ESOL and like teaching the classes, and then of course doing trainings and sort of a lot of different experiences, really kind of realizing not only becoming familiar with, I think, some of the issues in the ESOL world, but really understanding what are the issues for multilingual learners of English and really kind of trying to see the world from their perspective. So imagining that you're an immigrant or a refugee or this or that, and you're coming to the US and what is that potential trauma that you're dealing with. And so really kind of thinking about really not only the educational needs of multilingual learners, but I would say sort of their social emotional needs, because not only perhaps they might be dealing with psychological trauma of different sorts, maybe their parents got deported, they're living with their parents, they lived in a refugee camp, but there could be a lot of different things that they're not really necessarily they are not necessarily given an opportunity to work through, or kind of because we're focused kind of on the language and education. But of course they're adapting to a new language, adapting to a new culture. So it's much more with multilingual learners, it's much more than just the language, really kind of beyond that. So I kind of that has developed a bit of my awareness. And then what kind of sparked it also was it's a name you may or may not be familiar with, Dr. Luis Javier Penton Herrera.
No.
Yeah, but especially it's kind of because it was last summer. It was a call for papers where he was the guest editor for a special issue of Anglica. So it's an international journal on English studies, and it was a special issue on social emotional learning, which seemed to kind of coincide because I thought, on this developing knowledge that I just mentioned. And I thought, well, I know globally, in a very general sense, what that means, but I don't really know specifics. And I've been sort of the last couple of years getting into sometimes what I call a writing and publishing gig, because at a place like Dalton State, we don't necessarily, being a smaller state college, we don't necessarily have to do much. We don't have to do much of that. It's not that publisher parish environment. But I've been kind of interested of kind of doing that and learning about these new areas, not only for my own knowledge, but ultimately that will benefit my students. Sharing the knowledge and doing research, with them as participants and all of that. And so I kind of thought, ooh, that might be kind of interesting. So when I looked at SEL, particularly in the ESOL world, that name came up like 10 million times. So, but that's kind of what started it too. And then what I did is I submitted a proposal for a project for that special issue of that journal, which even though it was not accepted for that special issue, Dr. Pinton Herrera, who was the guest editor, invited me to be part of a book that he and a colleague are co-editing on that exact same topic. Because, even though, and you probably might know this, if you look at SEL, I think in a general sense, so like for K-12 kids, there's a lot out there research wise. If you look at or a fair amount. If you look at SEL and teacher education, there's not much. And if you're looking at SEL and ESOL teacher education, even less. So, so I'm doing that. And then there was actually this summer where he and a colleague put together a call for papers is on social emotional learning and advocacy. So kind of tying those two concepts. So I submitted a proposal for that book, which was accepted. So it's something, not that I want to be the next guru, nothing like that. But it is an area that I see a need for, that I think I have an interest in. And I think that our teacher candidates in general should be aware of, not only the relevancy of it for all students, I would say in a general sense, the particular need for it for multilingual learners, but then also thinking about themselves, their own social emotional, because that was part of that project I did last fall. There was a scale that I found on where I did sort of like a pre-post question. That's something I don't know if it's published yet or will be. Yeah, that's it's the Teaching with the Heart. So that book with Dr. Pinton Herrera and Dr. Martinez Alba and a couple other co-editors. But where was part of that project, what I did, one of the things that I did is I found a scale of measuring students' own SEL and did pre-post and did some kind of analysis. So it kind of made me think, yeah, that's what we need to be thinking about too, not only as their teacher candidates in the education program, but I think that is one big reason why teachers don't stay, is because being a teacher, there's a lot of social, emotional, it could be trauma or angst, stress, all of that. And we're not necessarily preparing them to deal with that stuff, but also equipping them with the strategies to deal with it and to work through and handle and manage their own social emotional and their social emotional and psychological states. And of course, as education is crazy. So, it's really we need that now more than ever. So that's, I guess, a very long story of sort of how I wandered my way into SEL.
No, that was brilliant. And you hit on what felt for me like the two sweet spots of your chapter. One was recognizing all of the implications for language learners outside of the language, all the social, cultural, all the other things that they may be grappling with that could interfere with or can, when supported, enhance their ability to learn. So that was great. And then the second piece was, we need to think about the social emotional learning or the social emotional capabilities of teachers, because they're the ones who are then influencing the students. And so they need to have those capabilities to support the development of those capabilities in students. And so you were one of two chapters. Yours was more hands-on case study piece, and the other piece was more of a theoretical overview, and they worked together so well. I thought, did they plan this? Did Brian have a plan when he sent this chapter in?
No, I'm kind of curious. So like, what's the content of the other chapter that you're
It's
mentioning?
not English or multi-language learning focused, but it's more an overview of pre-service teaching, how we prepare pre-service teachers, the education for pre-service teachers, preparing them to develop their social emotional competence so that they can support their learners. So that's where this just was really nice. I felt like a really nice dynamic between your two chapters from a theoretical perspective
Yeah.
and a practical applied perspective that worked really nicely.
Well, I can't wait for the book to come out so I can read that chapter. It sounds kind of interesting that it might be not only for my own learning, but could be something I might use in my for future research.
No, absolutely. And in fact, one of the reviewers for your chapter, which was not planned by me, I mean, I did assign the reviewers, but I mean, I wasn't thinking that properly, obviously, about it, because she turned out to be one of the reviewers of your chapter who wrote the theoretical perspectives on that topic. So I thought, oh my God. And she's like, oh my gosh, this is so nicely aligned with what I did. And I thought, oh yeah, you're right. Actually, it works really well together. So that was
Wow,
just,
it's interesting.
yeah. So thank you. So I appreciated hearing your perspectives on both of those. I also appreciated that you actually had some practical hands-on content in your chapter that you actually went out to explore and measure and completed that case study. I thought that was really, from my perspective, seeing some of that hands-on practical evaluation of what's actually happening on the ground is a nice counterpoint to the more conceptual stuff. So I really liked having that balance in the book. So I appreciated your work on that. Thank you. I have one other question for you, Brian, and that is, how would you describe the practical applications of your chapter? So what could a reader take and do with what they take from your chapter?
What I tried to do is not only share the logistics of the study in terms of here's how the data I collected, here's how I analyzed it, here are the results, which I think can help people sort of at least minimally maybe motivate them to think about SEL in their own context, especially if they're teacher educators, because I think that's kind of one thing that I try to advocate for in the chapter. That is an absolute need, is to more strategically and intentionally embed SEL into teacher education, not just ESOL, but just across the board. So I think that's one sort of takeaway that people that hope minimally it might inspire them. Kind of like you said, also, secondly, because it's more classroom based. So maybe might motivate people like, oh, I might want to try that in my class, or maybe not do that, but maybe do something different research wise. But also, I think the logistics of the course units, because think about sharing the readings, the blog posts, and the articles that we read, the jigsaw reading activity where I put the students into 4 different groups. Each group read a different reading, and then they kind of did that. So I think maybe kind of not only sharing the details and the logistics of that, perhaps might have people sort of think about ways that they might do something similar, or maybe take that and build on it. Because sometimes I find when I read articles, I get inspired, but not necessarily to duplicate exactly what they did. But it triggers I could do this and pair it with that, or so I hope that the readers sort of take that away too, that maybe if they feel like they want to kind of duplicate it, or what would be kind of interesting, maybe do something similar and see in their context, did they find the results that I did or not, and why might that be, to kind of not only build their understanding, expand the literature in this area, whether it's ESOL teacher education more specifically, or teacher education writ large. But maybe it might inspire them also to say, oh, well, maybe I could do this, take some of what I did, but add their own components or their own little tweaks, and then might inspire them to kind of do that. So I think there's a number of potential takeaways from my chapter, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, you too. And it was great to meet you. And if you need anything else, don't hesitate to let me know.